The plan was to head up and spend the weekend at Commonground, and then on the Sunday we were going to come over to Lincoln's block and torch those bonfires for him. But as fate would have it, that ain't happening. But that's okay, because this is still a really good forum for us to be able to have a rave. I'm recording this, so I'll be able to share it with anyone who can't make it along today. But it means we can have a few interstaters like Arnica, who was here, who's disappeared. Oh, no, there she is. And also there's a few internationals. There's friend Mark in the UK who wasn't going to get up at 5 a.m. And also Andrew in San Francisco, who's a keen enthusiast. So this is still a good substitute, but not quite like face-to-face. But we've scheduled about 45 minutes just to hear from Phil the story of Commonground and how this cooperative was set up and how it's established itself and still remaining today, 40 years later. Is that right, Phil?
Yeah, 38 years in September, yeah.
Wow. I'm guessing you've got a lot of wisdom to share with us. We're just I'll give you a quick snapshot of where we're at. This was an early lockdown idea. We've had, online conversations. We've shared lots of ideas around it, gathered the momentum, and we've had one face-to-face gathering in February this year at Yarra Junction. And we've managed to sketch out a vision. We've got our values and we're all on the same page in terms of what we're trying to achieve. We're aiming to have a non-residential shared piece of land, which is our cooperative. We're aiming for about minimum 50 acres. With water it'd be great. And we're hoping to have one permitted structure on it to begin with, but primarily we'll have a number of villages around it that'll be temporary dwellings, so tiny houses, yurts and teepees and tents and soul pads and so on. So we're semi-permanent. That's to do with what we anticipate the challenges around permits and so on might be to begin with. We're probably going to have around 30 of us on board, and we've just been registered as the 6th land share cooperative in Victoria. So yeah, we've got our certificate. We just have, after this conversation with Phil, we'll have a formal formation meeting, which is a passing of the rules, which we sign off on, and then we are a co-op. So it's a good day.
Cheers.
So what if I hand over to you, Phil? Tell us your story.
First things first for me, I'd like to acknowledge the Taungurung mob, which Commonground's on, and all their work and the great work with Taungurung Lands and Water Council, which I believe, Ben, you're got some connection with now, so it'd be good to hear about that at some point. Yes, so acknowledging that, and wherever anyone is, obviously spread around this big country of ours. Look, the other one is, I think so I don't know whether, Ben, if I get carried away, whether you can actually play a bit of a facilitatory role if people put their hand up or something with questions, so that it can help, direct, the more useful stuff for you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sounds good, Phil.
Okay. The potted history. We were a group of Melbourne-based people. There was 5 adults originally that formed the original core group, and that was really the early formations was it probably late 70s, early 80s. And we all worked in health and welfare. We weren't in sort of the environment movement as such, in some ways still relatively embryonic then compared to the sort of direction of it now. And we evolved really out of a group called Health Action Collective. So we were a group of professionals. I was trained as an occupational therapist. There was others, there were social workers. And we saw the health and welfare system as not really doing things that would mean that people could actually grow personally themselves or deal with their own issues. It was a paternalistic controlling system. The long and the short of it is that a group of us, particularly inspired by a woman called, well, her name was Glen Alderson then, but she changed the name later to Glen Oka, that formed a communal household in Paran in Melbourne. That was, over time, we were sort of evaluating what was our best contribution to social change as we understood social change. And we decided that our best contribution would be, because a lot of groups at the time were very energised. I worked in disability rights, others worked in low income housing and opportunities. My partner worked in mental health area. There was a lot of groups. The land rights movement was developing. There was a lot. Glenn had worked extensively in women's housing, women's health issues. And there's a lot of groups, and it was the self-help groups, collective of self-help groups was formed at this time and eventually formed into developing Ross House in Melbourne. These groups had a lot of energy, but they didn't always have a lot of organisational skills. So the combination of this, we thought, well, what's our best contribution? We decided that in some ways to support groups to actually enable their own vision rather than us imposing what they ought to be doing. I guess where this has got to now, clearly for Aboriginal people in Australia, is how to be a good ally. And so we thought, all right, let's look at supporting people in organisational skills. The next part of it was that we were developing, we also felt like there wasn't a place that people could come to do this sort of work, because a lot of places, groups couldn't afford, like corporates could, to go away for their big retreat weekends and the like. So we thought maybe we need to build a place that is welcoming and accessible to people. And then the third factor was we thought, well, if we're going to talk about all this good stuff about how to work well effectively as a group, then we ought to be actually living that. So we ought to be living as a collective and exploring that. So like you, we set off with this vision. We helped form our vision after many meetings, discussions, and decided on a cooperative as the first port of call of a legal structure. Because in some ways, we couldn't find a legal structure that we thought absolutely fitted what we were. Because when you're trying to do something that's not in the mainstream, it's not easy to find a legal structure. But we thought the co-op was the best fit at the time. Then we started looking for land, and we wanted somewhere that was accessible to Melbourne so people could get to it. We wanted somewhere that had a bit of a sense of sanctuary, so it was, so located in the bush. And we wanted somewhere we could afford, basically. And when we did basically a circle around Melbourne within 100 k's, heading north was really the only way. If you head down the west coast, I love the west coast, but prohibitively expensive. The east was not as easy to get to. So we started exploring. We found this bush block, 95 acres, and ended up within 6 months, we'd gone from working, like I worked full-time in the public service in Melbourne for the what was then called the Mental Retardation Division of the Health Commission. I left that job. We formed a co-op. We left Melbourne. My partner and I had our first child, and we started building, the place. It was extremely heady, wild, demanding, but crazy, but fantastically crazy time. So the three parts of it basically, and then the rest of it that's the sort of how it was formed. A family joined us soon after, so it ended up being 7 adults and 4 children with 3 families that actually rented a house down the road from where we are now. We started working physically on the place. We all lived within well, we had, basically 1 toilet and 1 shower for the 11 of us. So it was fairly rudimentary. We used to camp on the property to begin with. We did it pretty hard, like it was almost a little bit crazy, but we had a lot of energy. We were only, well, I was 30 when we started. So we're young, enthusiastic, had a lot of energy. Before we even finished building, because we had the work we wanted to do, we had groups coming and camping here. I work with disability rights groups, we'd have them coming up. We had people from the Housing Commission in Melbourne coming up. And where have we gone since then? Basically, there's been 3, as I said, from the formation. We've maintained our vision while there has been significant changes in the structure and elements of it over the years. The 3 components still are that we have a physical place here that groups come to. So we've got a pretty strong connection with Victorian Couriers who've used it for various things, including the local Tangerong mob over the years. A lot of environment groups, activist groups. So we still run the venue. We still have a community, an extended community. We have members that live in Melbourne, but we also have people that are resident here. I can talk a bit more about how that's changed over the years and where it's heading. And then the third component, which is support to community-based social change organisations. Over the years, that developed so much and we had so much work in it. And the need for that developed the second aspect of our organisation called the Group Work Institute, which for practical reasons was better off based in Melbourne. So that's based in Thornbury and has now become technically sort of a separate organisation because of management challenges and operates as the Group Work Centre. But we work very closely and collaboratively and are sort of still, you might say, part of the same show. Look, that's the quick 38 years. What's happened? Oh, not much.
Fantastic.
No, lots of things, lots of groups, lots of experiences, lots of ups and downs. We feel that we have provided a lot of inspiration for people and support to people. At the same time, I will not kid you that there's been, huge challenges. Embarking on this sort of project inevitably and specifically is a huge personal growth journey. And in some ways, if you're not prepared to embrace that element of it, I've talked with many people forming groups and more so than yours that are residential, but even if they're non-residential, the efforts to actually learn how to do all this collaboratively, as I'm sure all of you would know from doing various work things or formats, but really trying to do it in a way that is more collaborative than the hierarchies that we might tend to work in, requires a basic good old footy term, guts and determination. Yeah, it's challenging, but the challenges we face at a global level are reflected and an expression of how we operate as organisations and as group as a micro level. So to me, while it might appear a little fanciful, how well we do it in our smaller groups actually affects and can be a part of a much bigger picture of how we're doing it. Because whether it's me working with my fellow communards here or the leader of a country talking to another leader, it's people working with people. And us doing it well together is a huge challenge, but is the challenge we need to, I think, get on top of on the planet. So fundamentally, what's the lessons learned from all these years? To keep working on how to live and work well together and to keep at it.
Great. Thanks, Phil. What a great intro. That's fascinating For me, I'm sure for everyone, I could see lots of similarities of our journey so far, where we're up to and what we've seen, and also some differences. I think it sounds like you had a very strong social impact mission to begin with. So that's how you've kind of attracted your community around you with a very clear ethos. We've got we've all got common values and a shared vision, and it's very much for building our own community for recreation and for sustainability and for good living. So but we're building those ties to connect with each other as much as with the outside world, probably more so than with the outside world. So that's interesting. I've got a question just about how you actually got hold of the land in the first place, because it sounds like it was only you and your partner in the very early days, or a couple of you.
There was 5 of us.
5 of you, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And how did you get the funds together? Was that an issue for you?
The original land purchase, which you're not going to be too happy about in some ways, but in 95 acres in 1984 cost us $45,000. But remembering that is still 38 years ago, basically we all worked professionally, and at that stage we're only at the beginning of having families, so we saved and we pooled our money and actually just sort of put that money in. We borrowed a small amount, a small percentage of it. I think might have been $8,000 or $10,000 we had to borrow to get up to the 45,000. And then what didn't take us that long, a couple of years to pay that off. But from there, we actually, because of this particular vision we had and the connections we had with the work we had done, we actually got quite a lot of philanthropic money to actually establish the place. And why that was attractive to people was because of relative credibility of people, particularly Glenn, who had worked. She was about 10 years older than me at the time, so she'd worked extensively in a whole lot of Melbourne welfare networks. So we actually applied for philanthropic money, and why that was attractive to them was that we weren't looking at wages. Often when groups or things are setting up, we were looking for just bricks and mortar, and we were looking at then going, we would then be self-sustaining once we actually set it up, but we'd be doing a lot of support to groups and organisations that those organisations supported. So we actually did well with that, and that actually got us enough money to actually build. In some ways, we have become what I think they call now a social enterprise, but back then the term wasn't generally used. So we operate now by having groups come. If they've got funding and can pay, they pay us professional rates. But we also have a priority system of groups that we support. So, you know, for example, Uncle Larry from the Tungarong mob had a group of young people a couple of years ago from Melbourne, young fellas that were having some trouble, and they wanted to take them back to country and do some work. And they came and camped for a few days and did important work on the bush. Didn't charge them. But if people have funding and they're applying for funding sometimes, then they'll go, how much do you charge, blah, blah, blah. And we make it clear that groups that are paying are helping us support groups that can't pay. So we have come close to the edge at times, but basically we have kept our heads above water financially for the last 38 years. And with this COVID time, with, as you know, keeping on having to postpone groups, and therefore, like last year, we basically pretty well went the year with no groups, obviously. Actually, as much as I have to admit that the government has actually helped keep us afloat, because we had one of our workers, Emma, working on JobKeeper, and we've applied for various grants that people can get to keep ourselves afloat. Was that off track a bit, or does that answer your
No.
question?
Yeah, that answers my question really well. That's great. That's yeah, really good to get a good rounded understanding of where you're at. I think there's some of the things that we're discussing at the moment, and we'll probably develop as a co-op around venue hire or being an enterprise and having monies earned will come up. We've got a slightly different makeup in that we're trying to keep it as a low cost contribution, equal across the whole group of say 30 of us. Initially we said 30 to 40 of us chucking in 10 grand each, which is, almost 400 grand, but 18 months later, that's not realistic. 20% increase in rural properties is thrown us out of the water a bit. So we're working on our finance policy, but the idea is keep it low, affordable and equal. And then we're going to have an annual contribution. So $1,000 a year each contributed, or 1,200 bucks, I think we said, 1,250, which gives us about 40 grand a year to play with. So things like infrastructure, maintenance, water, and so on, we'll have a little budget. So we won't need to promote ourselves or develop those enterprises initially. We've got a fairly watertight model in terms of getting established, which we think will work. We don't want it to be at a cost to the members from something else that they might want to do with their money. So we're looking at ways that we can have an interest on the share and have a return. And the cooperative that we've set up is a distributing co-op. The members are allowed to take an income or make money from the venture, even though that's not our primary purpose.
I was just going to make a comment about your financial setup. Obviously, quite different, and I guess the fundamental principle is that people can have input and are clear on what their entry and exit policies are. And just to make that, because the time will come, and I'm not trying to put a dampener on things, but the time will come when somebody goes, I'm not happy, I want to pull out, what happens, and to actually sort of think about that, which you may have done already, but before it happens, rather than trying to work it out as it goes. Yeah, because it's just the reality. Someone might go, oh, this has come up and I'm really, wanting to do this now and I need my money. How does that work? Is that somewhat sorted or on your agenda?
Yeah, we're definitely making all the obligations and the commitments very clear from the start. And to an extent, we haven't actually officially become members, so there will be a few other things that we'll put into the prospectus, if you like. But yeah, we're thinking about clear exits, contributions, time, energy, finance, and it's really good. They're big conversations, but it's working out, and it's been really good to see that we're actually all on the same page. A lot of the conversations are just unraveling, and we haven't had any issues or anything that we've clashed on or anything. But just in terms of your decision making, there's a question from Rach. Go for it, Rach.
Well, you might be about to ask my question. My question was going to be about how you did solve sort of really pointy, problematic decisions or crossroads, I guess, when it came down to push and pull between people, and how the decision making or confrontation was dealt with.
Yes, we have over the years worked hard on developing clearing and conflict resolution processes, and is part of the work, in fact, that group work does, and we used to do with a lot of groups in the early days, was supporting that, and would highly recommend having clear processes. I wrote a small piece in David Holmgren's book about, the reinvigorating the neighbourhood, that it's really important to have good process and to understand and have written down sort of your policies and ideas and agreement about what your processes are when there are disagreements, or how to make decisions. You're using consensus, to what degree, what's your backup for that. However, it doesn't matter what you have written. It's not going to guarantee that it will work well, but if you don't have good processes down, it increases your probability that it won't work well. As I said in the very beginning, in many ways, this work is ongoing work. It is about relationship. It is dynamic. I have been, as we have, working on this for nearly 40 years, in an active and meaningful and in many ways daily process. And I feel like I'm still learning. Like, the big thing for me, I think, to impart is be bold about it and go, this is going to happen. But when the sticky parts come, embrace it, get into it. Conflict isn't necessarily bad or evil. It's inevitable. We're going to disagree on things, work on it, listen well, get all those good processes active, and see this is actually, to me, part of the work that you're doing on social change. Don't see it as something secondary. See it as the actual thing you're doing to collaborate on whatever it is you're creating. You're doing it as a group. You're doing it to have things that are good for you, and that's a good thing. So I think we need to look after ourselves. And from what I've read of your thing, there's a lot of creatives in the group that have got a lot of creative energy, and that's exciting and that's important. But part of it is the actual learning how to live and work well together is primal social change work, and see it as going, all right, we're into this. It's full on. It's maybe even a bit tricky and demanding, but let's get into it. If you were going to be here, I was also looking at giving you Glenn's book. I don't know whether you've come across the GOAT, as we call it, Getting Our Act Together.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, we use it as a series. I've done some training with Commonground, or group work rather, and we use it as a series. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
And we've had Cinnamon, our CEO, has run a couple of sessions, and one on having difficult conversations and so forth.
That Lincoln up there with his blue sky dreaming hat on has got a question.
Yeah, I was wondering how you worked through, I suspect it was before the Planning and Environment Act in 1992, but how you worked through planning and building and getting permission.
The initial phase of that was that there was no trouble getting a planning permit for building here. And those sort of things change, and they have changed since then. Our zoning has changed and a lot of other things changed. But when we did it, it wasn't difficult to get planning permit to build on 95 acres. The interesting thing was that we were building one large building and going to be living in it communally and getting more members. And there was 11 of us to begin with, but hopefully more. And when we went, and it was actually the Seymour Shire Council, it was before Jeff Kennett's amalgamation, and we're now Mitchell Shire, but it was a smaller Seymour Shire Council. We had built up plans and we got them, all technically done well. Two interesting things happened. One was we asked them what are the limits in terms of the number of people that could live on the land. And they said, well, there's no real limit so long as they're in the one building. But as soon as we did separate buildings, there was a multiple occupancy, and they didn't like that. So they didn't care. And it's sort of this bizarre, really, thing to me that didn't matter how many people we had in the one building, so long as it was one building. On the basis that in the beginning, that's what we aimed to do, we went, okay. So there wasn't any difficulties with that. With the actual building permit, we used a participatory design process where we worked with an architect, and we had David Holmgren work with us on looking at the design process of water and roads and everything. And we took the plans once they were finalised, and they were done with us with an architect, Celia Sexton. And I remember going into the planning department, into Seymour Shire Council, and we went in with the fellow that was going to build with us. We actually had an owner-builder license, but we had a builder with us because it was a large building that we were building. It was beyond us, so he was going to be working as our like site supervisor. And we showed the plans to the planning department there, and the fellow looks at it and goes, for those who haven't been here, with mud brick, there was no other mud brick buildings done in this area at that time. It had curved walls, it was sort of a crazy sort of building. And we had an owner builder license, and he just stood up and looked at me and said, can you build this? And I almost kicked Graham under the table, because he's actually was a licensed architect turned builder himself, and a very unassuming fella, to sort of go, come on, because I hadn't built much. I wasn't a builder. And I was, yes, no worries, we can do this, blah, blah. And he's going, yeah, well, it's technically sound. We went through all the appropriate approvals in the building process, had all the inspections. One of the fundamental things we decided was that, again, people skills was paramount here. That when we went to talk to people, we'd heard from others just on the grapevine, oh, you don't want to go there, these people, oh, they're going to be angry and blah, blah. We went in positively, we went in constructively. We would have a building inspector come out, and we would in some ways cleverly ask them for assistance. And they actually enjoyed that. They go, well, what do you think of this? And they actually got down in the trench with us to sort of show us how to do stuff, because they knew we were owner builders. All of that sort of stuff just really helped us get through that part of the process. Having said that, since then, we have actually gone through a process of developing what we called a hamlet separate from the main building, and which initially got approval for 5 semi-detached dwellings, and all sorts of trouble has happened from that. That's where it became multiple occupancy. We got approval of it at one stage, and then the zoning changed for the area from rural living to rural, and therefore we had to go through the application process again. It required different expectations, of which we couldn't immediately fulfill. It became a huge circus. It's a mixed bag. You've got to really learn about what your regulations are, pick your fights, like, in other words, we decided with the building, we wanted it approved. I'm not going to publicly say here, seeing it's recorded, that we may have done some things that weren't entirely legal at the time, but I'm not going to be definitive about that, until such time as we managed to change things and possibly got things then approved at a later date. So it's like, it may be a conversation we can have in person, so I reduce incrimination possibilities. But yeah, it's like pick your fights. We didn't want to have a fight about the building and whether it was going to be legal or not. Some of the things and activities we've engaged with been a little borderline in terms of legality, but you play it as best you can and engage. So awareness of what the rules are, decide on what you don't want to have a fight about, decide what's important, and then, pursue things as best you can within that framework. Is that Yeah.
That's really good. How do you go with, I know you guys have pretty big events up there. You get 1,000 people up there for your Commonground Festival sometimes. So do you have an ongoing relationship with council for things like that, or do you avoid them until you only talk to them when you have to?
Don't trouble, and then trouble troubles you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, well, all right, a little bit tricky, but I'll take it that we're all allies here. The very first festival we put on, we decided that basically, because we do run events here, and we have the legal rights, and we are registered. We have a registered kitchen, registered accommodation with council, and we get inspections every year for that, blah, blah, blah. So we've got that sort of side of it. We just in our heads thought, look, we've got the legal right to run events. We're just having a bigger event. And the very first one we did, we were doing it just advertised through our networks. And then someone in our networks thought it would be really helpful if they spread it on their networks. And then we got a call from the council going, oh, this has come across my desk because it was advertised on a public forum. And what are you doing? Oh, nothing really. Long and the short of it was we madly scrambled to sort of see whether it was, you know, could get it to be legal. It's sort of, we covered some hoops. We got, you know, specific insurance to cover it because our insurance only covered it to a certain event. So we got particular event insurance. The long and the short of it was, yes, the relationship helped because I actually, for a period, had actually worked at our local Shire Council. So I knew people, all that relationship building helped. And the other one was they basically said, all right, if you go ahead with this, it's actually technically not legal. If anything happens, we cannot back you. And, you know, if anything goes wrong, you're going to be in sort of deep shit. We went, okay, we did it. Nothing went wrong. No one complained. But next time we did it, we went, no, that was sort of dumb. We decided we'd jump through all the hoops. Lots of hoops, had to have, you know, and some of it's not unreasonable, you know, proper evacuation plans. I mean, we considered a lot of that, but, you know, first aid, they had to have all sorts of, we had to make sure the marquees were inspected, that they were put up correctly. And we did all that. And you know, we informed police, we had police walkthroughs. We had a delightful thing where the police came and our kids grew up in Seymour and they actually had some mates whose father was a local copper. And those kids were here, volunteering here. So when the police came, they go, oh, hi, Johnny, hi, Fred. Again, they go, oh, yeah, how's it going? Oh, yeah, very good. And it's a dynamic of relationship building that actually, you could see just relaxed the police immediately. And we were friendly, yeah, come through, check it out. It's all, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so it's a bit of a mixture.
I think that's going to be our approach. When you've got so many people involved, if you have council or police telling you that you're not allowed to have a certain number of people on site, it'll ruin the whole thing. So we're going to do legitimate permitted dwelling, shared dwelling to begin with. And then I think, yeah, we're working out the RL, rural living zone versus rural versus farming and so on. We're looking particularly for RLZ, but as you say, it can change over time anyway. So we have to be flexible. I think, yeah, after this session, we're going to have another chat about next steps, and that'll be about block selection. Things have changed in 38 years. So we're talking about, we're not looking at a $45,000 block. But yeah, we are going to be thinking about bushfire, local council regulations, reputation of local council, building regs and all sorts of things like that, which is good. Oh, good rave. Been good to hear the Commonground story. It's fascinating and it's all very relevant, so it's exciting as well.
And look, what I'm hoping for, and Ben, you and I have had some initial emails about this, but that you still will be able to get to common ground, and being here in situ, you know, further questions come up or discussion, we can have it in person, which would be great, because then it can be a bit more of a lively, interactive discussion that can evolve, you know, a little more easily than what it can on Zoom. And I hope that, yeah, we can do that at some, well, we will do it at some stage, just not sure when. In terms of that, looking at other dates, the tricky thing for us, and I'll keep communicating, I guess, with you, Ben, is the best. But in what's happened is, because we've had so many rolling lockdowns, that we've had to postpone so many groups. Some have just pulled out and said, no, we're going to do it by Zoom. Some of it, like yourself, have kept postponing. That at this stage, technically, we're fully booked till the end of the year. But the other thing that happens is, like, a group recently said, we've got a booking in October, but we're cancelling it because we need enough time to reorganise, and we can't afford the possibility of, you know, not being sure about whether it's going ahead. We're going to organise it, either a smaller event in Melbourne or a combination of Zoom and people and whatnot. So I'll just keep in touch with you. We're trying to look at weekends if they come up, or when they come up, if that's the best go, I think, with you, Ben.
Absolutely. That's our next face-to-face gathering is really important. There's only so much we can do online. That one that we did have up at Yarra Junction was fantastic. So if we get the chance to do that again, that'll be great. I've got one more question. Has anyone else got a burning question? But I've got one to finish off, if that's okay. I'm interested to know where you're at, where Common Ground is at today, as in what's, you know, in terms of residents and members. I know that nobody's using your venue hire and so on, but what's the future look like? Where do you want to get to in 5 or 10 years?
Have you got another hour or two for that discussion?
Give us 10 minutes.
Again, would be the great sort of thing to have in person. Yeah, huge changes. We have been working, believe it or not, for nearly 8 years on our succession plan, because myself and other co-founders are getting older. Glenn, one of the primary co-founders, actually has died. She actually died nearly 7 years ago. And so we need to sort of go, okay, the handover to the next generation, that is actively being pursued at the moment, and is really quite a big conversation. And there's been significant changes in this last 18 months with residents, because been a number of people that have left. It's not just COVID related, but it sort of is all tied up a bit together, because there's a part of the soul of the place has been extracted by not having groups here or very few for 18 months, because that has been the soul and energy of the place. I don't think it's sort of about to collapse per se, but it really is an active part of discussion that we're having about where we are going to go in the next 5 to 10 years. And to tell you the truth, to be perfectly frank, we're not really sure at the moment.
Fascinating. Well, we'd love to hear more when we do get up there and we're on the block for having a face-to-face moment. But we'll also do some thinking about our long-term vision as well. I know that we've got short-term establishment goals. You know, we're getting registered and looking for land and thinking about exit strategies, but we haven't. And we do have a sort of a 5-year vision in mind of what it might look like. But I don't think anyone's talked about 10, 20 and 30 years yet. So we'll put that on our list of things to discuss as well. They're big questions.
And it can be a good discussion, and and it will evolve and change. But one of the things is that I feel proud about here is that some of our actual core vision has remained the same, but a lot of the actual framing and details needs to be able to be shaped and changed according to the circumstances that are real at the time. So having that deeper visionary sort of direction, I think, is really, really good. And then the flexibility to be creative within that sort of framework. So sounds like you're doing great. And I wish you well with your meeting. But go well, and we shall meet again.
Good on you, Phil. Thanks very much. Great to have you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.